Good afternoon, everyone. We'll bring this hearing to order, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. This very important hearing. I know some of you traveled a ways, and I appreciate you being here. Today we will hear about how LightSquared's proposal is going to impact the ability of small businesses to access the Global Positioning System, GPS. Thousands of small businesses rely on an accurate GPS signal for their day-to-day operations, and potential interference could severely handicap or impair those businesses. LightSquared aims at providing wireless 4G broadband coverage to 260 million Americans in both rural and urban communities by 2015. And I agree that we need to find innovative ways to provide high-speed internet access to underserved areas. Access to high-speed internet provides small businesses, especially those located in rural communities, with the opportunity and resources to compete in an electronic and global marketplace. However, such innovation should not jeopardize the currently established systems, including GPS, and add more unnecessary burdens to those who use them. Since it was first launched, taxpayers have invested over $35 billion in the GPS system. This national asset has become an integral part of our economy. We can see the value-added benefits in a variety of sectors. From a safer and more reliable energy grid to precise agriculture mapping, nearly every industry has benefited from this technology. And moreover, recent studies estimate that GPS supports over 3 million U.S. jobs and contributes over $3 trillion in economic activity. Federal test results from LightSquared's proposal showed significant interference on all types of GPS receivers. This alarmed many small businesses that they could be required to replace or retrofit their current GPS system. This will be an enormous cost to small business. Even though LightSquared is committed to spend $50 million to retrofit federal GPS devices, this does nothing for the nearly 1 million small businesses that are left to pay the bill that will easily cost billions of dollars. Moving forward, I'm confident that we can find a solution to provide more broadband to rural areas while not jeopardizing any small business GPS users. Again, I want to thank all of our witnesses for their participation. I now yield to Ranking Member Velasquez for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Expanding access to broadband is not just about technology. It is about job creation and growth. Through its adoption, companies can reach new markets across the globe while reducing costs at home. In fact, the number of jobs dependent on broadband and information technology is expected to grow by 25% over the next 10 years. This made the expansion of broadband connectivity a critical priority, and it's the main reason the administration set a target of reaching 98% of the population through such technology. Today, we will examine a proposal that will advance this objective. This plan, which centers on constructing a hybrid ground-based satellite network, would have brought benefits. Beyond its immediate payoff, widespread broadband adoption will mean new economic opportunity for communities across the nation, particularly rural America. For individuals looking to launch a new enterprise, broadband offers lower startup costs. This is especially important now as many dislocated workers are looking to entrepreneurship as a way to replace lost income. For the established small business, high-speed internet can expand a firm's client base using a company website, social networking, or other forms of online advertising. Firms can utilize voice and video communication to connect with customers around the world and reach previously untapped markets. They can store data online and access office productivity tools. While the proposal we are considering today shows promise to accomplish these goals, we have to consider its interference potential. One example is GPS, which serves a critical role in aviation safety and efficiency. In fact, the Department of Transportation's NextGen program focuses on modernizing this platform, and it is expected to create 160,000 jobs in 4 years, the same number the aviation industry lost in a decade. With 360,000 GPS-equipped aircraft and over 3 million jobs, we must ensure interference does not undermine this growing industry. Not only must we address the aviation industry's concerns, we also need to investigate the plan's small businesses' impact. Business owners in a variety of trades like precision agriculture and construction rely on GPS technology for its cost-saving benefits. Small farmers use GPS to save $5 billion annually on water and fertilizer costs. Inaccurate information or expensive equipment upgrades caused by interference could result in small business job losses. Recognizing these concerns, it is imperative to test this plan's technology. Doing so will ensure small businesses are not left with costly burdens. Regardless if this new plan is ultimately adopted, we must continue to push forward with R&D and evaluation. At some point, either through the current effort or subsequent endeavors, we will be able to mitigate GPS interference successfully and bring the benefits of broadband to nearly all small businesses and their customers. We should not let a complication that has multiple solutions hinder progress towards nationwide connectivity. Time and again, advanced technologies have been a springboard for growth. From mobile phones to biotechnology to the Internet, new technologies have brought jobs and prosperity. With this in mind, I look forward to hearing how we can further foster innovation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If committee members have an opening statement prepared, I'd ask that they submit it for the record. And just to explain to you the timing system, each of you have 5 minutes, and the lights will indicate green for that time period. When it's down to a minute, it goes yellow, and then red when you run out of time. If you run out of time, it's not that big a deal. Just don't go too far over. This hearing is obviously, or this subject matter has been heard in a lot of committees on the Hill so far. Small Business Committee, because it has such an impact here, but the Armed Services Committee, Transportation Committee, the Science and Technology Committee, the Agriculture Committee will probably have a hearing on it, so it is of huge importance. With that, we'll go to our witnesses now, so you can give your statements, and I'm going to turn to Representative West from Florida to introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Our first witness will be Mr. Dennis Boykin IV, the founder and manager of DB4 Consulting. Mr. Boykin is a small business owner, a veteran, licensed pilot, and a proud aircraft owner. He is an Army veteran and artilleryman with whom I served together in 1991 in Desert Shield, Desert Storm in the 5th Field Artillery. And Dennis, it's great to see you again, and hopefully all is well with your family. And he has been flying for over 30 years. Mr. Boykin will be testifying on behalf of the Leesburg Executive Airport Commission. Mr. Boykin.
Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, members of the committee, and old Army comrades, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to address this critical issue today. As Congressman West noted, critical to me not only as a small business owner who owns high-precision GPS in order to keep my aircraft safe and, more importantly, keep the people underneath my aircraft safe, but in a leadership position as a leader of the Leesburg Executive Airport, concerned about the welfare of our airport because we run a business. I have 3 concerns regarding this potential interference with high-precision GPS receivers: my family's safety, the costs associated with the proposal, and the impact on our general aviation infrastructure. And I've spent nearly $40,000 on GPS equipment installations over the last 8 years in 2 airplanes. I'm not unique in my community. Many of us have spent a lot of money to increase our margin of safety while running our businesses and flying our airplanes. And make no mistake about it, GPS is a matter of life and death. This is not hyperbole. I'm a combat veteran. I know something about life or death situations. And although I know you hear a lot of hyperbole sometimes about this issue, GPS is critical, not just to business, but to life. First, let's talk about my airport in Leesburg. We have a saying out there, as I serve the town and its residents in running that airport, and that airports are not about airplanes, they're about commerce. Our airport provides an interstate commerce benefit, bringing over 200 jobs and $80 million a year in economic impact to Leesburg and Loudoun County, Virginia. We have over 250 aircraft based at our field, and nearly all of them are GPS equipped. Now, the FAA estimates if LightSquared deploys the system as tested at Holloman Air Force Base a few months back, they're estimating a $440 million a year negative economic impact to general aviation, 800 lives lost per year, and $22 billion in opportunity cost if NextGen isn't deployed. That's their numbers, not mine. My estimate's a little more personal. I don't want to have to go explain to residents in Leesburg and to the town council why the airport is causing trouble. In my second role, managing a business, I'm hearing LightSquared's claims that their system won't interfere with GPS. Then I read Mr. Russo's testimony to the House Armed Services Committee Subcommittee on Strategic Forces that says exactly the opposite. LightSquared claims they have a filter. In fact, Mr. Carlisle, I think, has one here with him. will magically solve the problem that they caused, in my opinion. Am I expected to bear the expense of the certification, installation, downtime, and test flights surrounding these filters? Mr. Carlisle will tell you not that Garmin should provide that. Oh, by the way, the FAA hasn't certified these yet. Speaking of businesses, let's talk about environmental impacts. Recently, I took a business trip to Florida to an Army conference. Made that trip on a direct routing, thanks to GPS. Saved an enormous amount of fuel, not following the airway routes. This is the entire precept behind NextGen, direct routing. With any impact on GPS, we lose those environmental improvements and the reduced carbon footprint of each flight. And finally, I'm concerned about the safety of every flight. GPS signals, enhanced by wide area augmentation service, have created a precise flight environment today that is unrivaled in our history. Flight is so much safer today than when I learned to fly 30 years ago. I am no longer uncomfortable in getting up in bad weather. Now, let me put you in an entirely likely scenario. Imagine yourself flying in my airplane at night, returning from a trip. We're in the clouds. I'm on the GPS WAS approach to runway 17 at Leesburg, and the screen goes blank because there's a harmonic attenuation from the LightSquared cell tower I just flew over. Now, the engineers will tell you that cell phone towers only impact ground receivers. Every general aviation pilot on the East Coast will tell you otherwise. And don't ask me why I know this, but up to about 5,000 feet, you can get a good cell phone signal. I just happen to know that. There's absolutely no reason to create this risk to life and property without proper testing and without proper coordination. Now, we're going to hear a lot of testimony about how folks have fixed the problem already and there isn't an issue. Frankly, I'll remind everybody here that we're in a committee meeting chaired by someone from Missouri, and they have a great saying in Missouri: show me. And I would like somebody to put together a test that puts multiple base stations, multiple handsets out on that test range at White Sands and Holloman and make sure this thing really does work before we put lives at risk. I have a little bit of experience. When I used to work for the Motorola Corporation, I had to get trained in RF propagation. I'm not an engineer, but I know that things can interfere with each other. And I hope this committee would have something to say about how that works. I thank you for your time, and I thank you, more importantly, for your service to our great nation.
Thank you, Mr. Boykin. Our next witness is Mr. Rick Green. Rick is Precision Agronomy Manager for MFA in Columbia, Missouri. In his role, Rick helps family farmers utilize precision agriculture technology to increase crop yields and efficiency. Rick's testifying on behalf of Agriculture Retailers Association. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Venezuela, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Rick Green. I'm here to testify on the behalf of the Agricultural Retailers Association, a trade organization which represents ag retailers and distributors of crop inputs, equipment, and services. ARA members are scattered throughout all 50 states and range inside from a fairly small family business to a large cooperative with multiple locations. I'm a Precision Agronomy Manager for MFA Incorporated, a cooperative built by farmers for farmers. Our core business includes sales, service, and inputs of seed, fertilizer, precision agronomy, grain, feed, and livestock supplies. I began my agricultural journey in 1995 when my father first purchased a yield monitor with GPS. During that time, it was a struggle to operate this new type of technology and cope with the inaccuracies of GPS. While at Iowa State, as accuracy started to improve, I came to love what precision agriculture can do for farming. By preserving the environment, minimizing inputs, maximizing yield, and to give our farmers a greater return on their investment. So what is precision agriculture? Precision agriculture is using the latest technology to provide sound agronomic recommendations in a timely fashion in order to maximize yield, manage inputs, preserve the environment to ensure farmers with a sustainable way of farming. So, do some of your areas of your lawn grow better than others? Farm ground is the same way, only on a larger scale. Since then, GPS technology has evolved exponentially. Fleet vehicles use GPS for logistical tracking to minimize fuel consumption. Tractors drive themselves within 1 inch worth of accuracy to minimize overlap. Planters and sprayers turn off individual sections and automatically reduce over-application of inputs. On-the-go sensors detect how much nitrogen a plant will require. River levees are surveyed in 2/3 of the time than it takes traditional surveyors. Aerial applicators vary nitrogen rates on the fly to reduce runoff and increase plant uptake. Irrigation systems vary water rates based on soil characteristics to reduce water waste, and the list goes on. We would not be able to perform any of these functions without the high-accuracy GPS. Jess Lowenbrow with Purdue University did a study back in 2004 using an 1,800-acre model farm. And he found that a farmer that uses high-accuracy GPS will decrease his hours of operation by 17%. That 17% is not only operation, but it's also a decrease in fuel, maintenance, and inputs like seed, pesticide, and fertilizer. Times are changing, and the producer needs to be more efficient in order to combat global competition. Bruce Erickson with the Purdue University also did a study on economic adoption of precision farming technologies. From 2002, prices are up 350% in commodities, seed prices are up 266%, and fuel and fertilizer is up 270%. Efficiency and increased productivity is the key to surviving in this global market. According to the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, the world population could rise to 8.2 billion people in 2030, which will require a 50% increase in food production over the next 20 years in order to feed the global demand. The only way we're going to be able to achieve this goal is by using high-accuracy GPS, biotechnologies, and proper management. Precision agriculture industry has over 400,000 high-accuracy receivers valued at $13,000 and replacement cycle of 10 to 15 years, and adds approximately $19.9 billion per year of value to the grower. MFA has over 700,000 acres in GPS nutrient management, $9.5 million acres covered with high-accuracy RTK coverage, and has almost $20 million of GPS equipment sold to the farmers that will be directly affected by the implementation of LightSquared and terrestrial component. Since 2005, MFA has seen a 600% increase in sales and adoption rate of 40% of our customer base. It's like asking the American population to switch their analog TVs to a $13,000 digital TV when LightSquared throws a switch. LightSquared must not be allowed to broadcast their signal in the upper and lower bands of the GPS until a feasible and economic resolution is found. To conclude, it's the accuracy of GPS that makes the technology important. Ideally, a solution will be found that allows GPS and wireless broadband to coexist, but LightSquared and GPS providers will have to work together. We believe farmers and ranchers and GPS companies should not have to bear the additional financial burden in resolving this issue. Thank you.
And it's my pleasure to introduce to the committee Mr. Jeffrey Carlisle. He's the Executive Vice President for Regulatory Affairs and Public Policy for LightSquared. Prior to joining LightSquared, Mr. Carlisle served as Deputy Chief and later Chief of the FCC's Wireline Competition Bureau, where he managed the development of the Commission's broadband policies. He has over a decade of experience in telecommunications law. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the committee, thank you for having me here today to talk to you about LightSquared and GPS. And one thing that's very important to understand up front, and my colleagues on the panel here are going to very clearly make the case that GPS is important to them. And nobody in my company doubts that one bit. In fact, GPS is crucial to us. We have to have a functioning GPS system in order to coordinate the signals on our network. And the people who bring devices to our network are all going to have GPS devices, GPS receivers built into their devices. So no debate about that GPS is important. It is crucial to the American economy. We use it every day, and it's important to safety of life. There's another important issue, though, that's particularly relevant to this committee, and that's the fact that small businesses suffer today from a lack of choice in their ability to get wireless services. The committee, LightSquared is building a network that won't just bring one competitor to the market, but will bring dozens of competitors to the market. We already have over 17 business partners who are waiting for us to have our network ready to go so they can start selling broadband services to end users. The effect of this is to enable them to lower prices to end users and small businesses, the people who need it most. Better connectivity and extension of connectivity to rural areas, which historically have been on the short end of the stick when it comes to wireless networks and will definitely be so when it comes to broadband networks. And this is a problem that we have to deal with. Make no mistake, the lack of effective broadband infrastructure makes America 15th in the world in terms of broadband adoption. And why is this important overall? These consume 24 to 25 times more data than a regular cell phone. That was just 3 to 4 years ago before that started to be the effect. In less than 2 years, we will have too many devices and too little spectrum. We're the only realistic new source of spectrum within that time frame. And let's be clear, there will always be issues with existing uses of spectrum when you have a new network being built. With 700 megahertz, which was another band, it was wireless microphones. With here, it's GPS. With 800 megahertz several years back, it was public safety. These issues can be solved. If we can't solve them, we aren't going to be able to provide services to the people who need them. And the real loser on that will be small businesses. They're the ones whose bottom line get hit the worst. Not in my backyard does not work in spectrum. There's not one piece of spectrum in the whole range that you can pick that will not have some sort of incumbent issue. So how do we solve the issue? I think, unfortunately, a lot of the commentary that you hear about this conflates our old proposal of starting in the spectrum closest to GPS with the proposals we have on the table now, where we will offer our service on the spectrum farthest away. And this will address the issue for over 99% of GPS devices, simply by physics. They don't look that far down into our spectrum, and that covers cellular devices, personal navigation devices. It covers aviation devices. And to show that effect, the government testing itself, which was separate from the industry testing on this, concluded that initial test results demonstrated that some applications, for example, aviation, were able to operate with little to no degradation when we were operating on the spectrum farthest away from GPS. That's been established for months now. So what are we left with? We're left with precision devices. So we're going from 400 million devices across the country to something less than 750,000, perhaps as few as 100,000. These are the ones that are designed to get to centimeter level accuracy and are used in agriculture, surveying, and construction. And I think there's room for skepticism in terms of the claims as to how hard this issue is to solve. For months now, we have heard about there's not enough room in the devices. It would take a backpack-size filter to fix it. It would cost too much. It's going to take too long. It's going to take years and billions of dollars. Well, I have a precision device right here, actually. It's from an unnamed manufacturer. We bought it on eBay. It's right there. As you'll see, when you take the dome off, there's room in this device, and this is the antenna. This is where you place the filter for the antenna. It's right here. It's this little square here. The filter that we have developed in a matter of days at a cost of $6 per unit is right here. Now, our solution isn't going to be a solution for every receiver. Many receiver manufacturers will have to come up with their own solutions. But what this is a proof of three concepts. It can be done inexpensively, and it can be done quickly. I also think the issue of bearing the cost for this proposal is also something that's misunderstood. Just last August in 2010, Garmin issued a voluntary recall of 1.2 million GPS receivers that had battery issues. Their stock price declined about a cent the day they announced that. So this is an issue that comes up in private industry all the time. Manufacturers who have put devices out there that are subject to this kind of interference when they shouldn't be should bear some of the responsibility, and we have already borne a significant amount of the cost of addressing the issue for hundreds of millions of devices. And I look forward to receiving your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Our final witness is Mr. Tim Taylor, the President and CEO of Free Flight Systems in Irving, Texas. His company manufactures aviation GPS navigation systems for commercial and military aircraft. He has over 35 years of experience in this industry, and Tim is testifying on behalf of the Aircraft Electronics Association. Welcome, and thanks for being here.
Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the impact of small business GPS users and industry of the proposal from LightSquared. My name is Tim Taylor, and I'm President and Chief Executive Officer.
Make sure your mic's on.
Is it, is that better?
There you go.
I'm
that
sorry.
Helps.
My name is Tim Taylor, and I'm President and Chief Executive Officer of Free Flight Systems. Today, I have the privilege of also representing the Aircraft Electronics Association. The association represents more than 1,300 aviation businesses worldwide, including avionics manufacturers, repair stations, distributors, and schools. Of these, more than 80% are small business. My company, Free Flight Systems, is a manufacturer of avionics systems for commercial military aircraft and was the first company to certify an airborne WAAS receiver. Free Flight Systems specializes in next-gen avionics, GPS navigation systems, GPS WAAS sensors, data link radios, and radar altimeters. Our entire industry has been working towards the implementation of GPS-based navigation, air traffic management, and landing systems for over a decade. This ongoing transformation of the nation's airspace system, next-gen, is predicated upon the availability of ultra-high integrity GPS position information, which has in turn been made possible by some 30 years of work in GPS technology that lives on the very fringes of human engineering capability. All of this development has been accomplished with a consistent assumption of a certain level of protection of the GPS signal spectrum, one that long predates any of this recent debate. LightSquared has proposed a nationwide wireless broadband network that pours high-energy radio waves into the previously protected spectrum. We, like all Americans, support a low-cost nationwide wireless broadband network, but not one that compromises the safety and efficiency of the national air transportation system. Quick studies are being undertaken and quick decisions are being made. This is entirely incompatible with the requirements of safe, airspace-critical system design. I'm reading of voluntary spectrum self-limitation, and I see reports of instant solutions to interference through the addition of a filter that was thrown together in the past few months. This is not how it works for us. The FAA estimates, and I would agree, no less than 10 to 15 years would be required to bring an amended product safely to the aviation marketplace, assuming no further changes to spectrum use. So my testimony today is not intended to support or deny the reports that have been submitted regarding the compatibility of the two systems. The record has more than enough evidence to draw a conclusion. My intent is to explain the aviation certification process and the extreme cost to small business that any change to the aviation-certified GPS navigation and surveillance systems would cause. GPS satellites are low-powered and a long way away. The signals we receive are less than the noise interference generated by the metal box we put the receiver in. But people's lives depend upon our ability to read that information and not get it wrong any more than once in every 10 to 1,000 million flight hours. If you've ever been on an aircraft landing in low visibility conditions, you will appreciate this level of integrity, as do those who live close to airports. To expect the industry to maintain performance requirements like these in a rapid response mode to a significant noise environment change is entirely unreasonable. For example, in a stable requirements environment, we have been developing a replacement GPS for one of our older products for some 6 years. We're still about a year away from a certified GPS engine and 2 to 3 years away from a usable avionics system implementation. Approval of that system into real aircraft will take another 1 to 2 years. I can categorically tell you I do not know if the new system will work in the most optimistic LightSquared plans that are on the table. I can tell you it will not work at all at LightSquared's FCC-approved transmission levels and spectrum. AEA member companies have been manufacturing, selling, and installing GPS navigators, surveillance, and emergency locator systems to the aircraft owners and operators for nearly 20 years. These systems have been designed, manufactured, and certified to the government's technical standards to provide the aviation consumer with an assurance of usability and acceptability within the national airspace. Any efforts by LightSquared to generate a requirement resulting in costly recertification and retrofits of the already installed systems will directly and negatively affect the industry and the nation's airspace. In closing, while we support the concept of low-cost national wireless broadband system, no system, regardless of its anticipated benefit, can be allowed to compromise the safety and security of the national air transportation system. Changes that affect the national air transportation system require long-range planning, and we encourage LightSquared or any other company to participate in the aviation technical standards development process. RTCA and the FAA have been working towards next-gen for nearly 20 years. If neighboring technologies need changes in the aviation systems in order to be compatible, these companies need to work with the FAA and RTCA so that the next generation of aviation products might be designed and certified to be compatible with their future business plans once the current generation of products reaches the end of its service life. The idea that a new entrant into the marketplace can arbitrarily introduce a new product that immediately compromises aviation safety and security while expecting the aviation industry to design, manufacture, test and certify and install an aviation-compliant filter is simply not realistic. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to address the committee. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Carlisle, I have a quick question on your receiver there you've got, which I've never seen a receiver that big before. But my question to you is, the filter that you held up, which you talked about you could fit inside there easily, the GPS antennas that I have on the aircraft that I fly are the same size as that filter, maybe just a little bit larger. So how's that going to fit in that antenna? And that includes the streamlined casing on it for the slipstream. But I'm just curious how that's going to...
Now, I'm glad you asked that question because it allows an opportunity to really clear this issue up. This is a precision receiver that gets you down to centimeters for use in agriculture, surveying, construction. The type of receivers you're talking about in your plane are not that kind of precision receiver, all right? Under our proposal, which puts us at the bottom end of our band under the minimum performance standards, which are adopted internationally, we should be fine under that. The FAA is reviewing that. But all the testing of aviation receivers that was done by both the Federal Government and by industry shows that the aviation receivers perform much better than the minimum performance standard. So we are not talking about, under our current level of proposals, requiring any change-out. And let me repeat that because it's important. Any change-out of aviation receivers. If it was going to take us 8 to 10 years to go through the certification process in order to do that, that would not be a commercially feasible business plan. So what we have proposed is a use of our spectrum that does not require any change-out of aviation receivers.
Well, that brings us in, and the problem I have is, and you used in your testimony, you used the comment little to no degradation. The little is the part that bothers me. And you said just now in the question, you said should be. It's the should be that bothers me, because in aviation we deal in zero tolerances. Mm-hmm. Zero tolerances. So if there's any concern out there, we're going to end up having to retrofit and filter, because it is zero tolerance. And what that's going to cost, and I'm very curious as to what, and in fact I want to hear from all the panel, what we think this is going to cost in terms of that retrofit, because at least when it comes to aviation, it has to be certified. Well, if it has to be certified, that's when it gets really expensive. I
absolutely agree with you, and if I can directly respond to that, okay. That's absolutely true. And the fact is that we should only move forward if this can be done while absolutely assuring safety of life in aviation. All right, and we're working with the aviation community in order to do that. That is something that we believe is non-negotiable. All right, nobody in our company is running out to irresponsibly deploy a network that is going to cause issues with people with air safety in the United States. That's not what we're about. And we're absolutely committed to making sure this will work, and that the FAA is satisfied, that NTIA is satisfied, and FCC is satisfied on that front. And we've worked with FAA for years. We've worked with we're members of We've worked with RTCA for years. We've been members for years on these issues. So we've put a lot of resources into making sure that that happens. In terms of cost, again, we believe our proposals will take us in a direction where there will be no cost to aviation in order to accommodate the network, and that's where we want to be.
How is that no cost, though?
Because aviation receivers will not have to be replaced. We are taking all of the cost of solving the issue on our side, which is over $100 million, by the way.
Mr. Taylor?
So first of all, I would echo your comments on little to no. We don't live in the world of little to no. We live in the world of certainties, as I said, measured in thousands of millions of parts, very, very, very high integrity and availability of our systems. I would also mention that many of the systems out there were developed back in the 90s. I mean, there's a lot of aircraft systems. We, as a company, have over 2,000, we know, systems flying that were developed in the 90s. The requirements for noise interference testing on those were significantly less than the requirements levied on the modern receivers. So they certainly would have to be addressed. And I have no idea how they would work in this noise environment. No one has yet tested one. For the newer receivers, as we said, there is a very strict FAA requirement for noise. As I understand it, the proposal for LightSquared to use the lower spectrum comes very, very close to the edge of that, or crosses slightly that current noise requirement. And the concept that we're going to be okay because there's some margin in there, again, does not work for me. This is something that needs to be tested and evaluated. And it's not one field test. It is a very serious, comprehensive series of regressive testing that will take a long, long time to accomplish.
Mr. Boykin?
I don't know what the cost is. I'll go back to testing, though, and it all sounds good, but back to the show me concept, I'll take you back to 1981 at a field in Arizona where a client of mine, when I worked for Motorola, was complaining about interference. Couldn't figure out why he couldn't talk to that repeater on a mountaintop 60 miles away. Could almost see the mountain. But he couldn't talk to it with his 15-watt radio. Drove 2 miles back to Interstate 19 and found the crew from the large construction company that was operating in the 27 megahertz band and asked them to key their radios every minute. Drove back to my client's site and said, okay, let's try doing it now, and that's exactly what it was. My client was using a radio in the 450 megahertz FM band for business. That's 400 megahertz and 2 miles away, and that amount of electrical energy in the air interfered with a 60-mile transmission. And note from the chart Mr. Carlisle brings in that we're talking about a spectrum spread of 30 megahertz between ground-based transmitters that I have to fly over. So I'll just go back to the point, Mr. Chairman, that I spent over $2,000 a receiver to do my WAS upgrade a few years ago. We're talking thousands of dollars for upgrades if necessary. Let's get back to the testing. That's what really needs to get done.
Mr. Green?
Well, I'll concur with the two gentlemen, Boykin on my left and Taylor on the end, with the fact that we need to have a lot more testing done on this, just to make sure we don't go through and interfere. Being in the agriculture industry, I do recognize that receiver, and that receiver is a lot of the same type of size that we have for our high accuracy RTK. Now, I went through and actually crunched some numbers. MFA has approximately 250 high-accuracy GPS units across the state, and we cover approximately 1 million acres with those high-accuracy RTK antennas. Assuming that LightSquared's filter is going to cost around $800, to go on retrofit, or basically to purchase those filters, it's going to cost roughly $200,000, and $200,000 for the filters and approximately $200,000 for the resource. The resource is the personnel, the truck, the fuel expenses to go around and take care of that. Time frame in that period will take at least 1 year's worth of time in order to go through and do that. And that's just for the 250 high accuracy receivers that we have. Now, if you go ahead and you take a look at it, Mr. Carlisle said that there could be anywhere between 100,000 and 750,000. High-accuracy RTK antennas. Our belief is that there is at least 750,000 to 1 million high-accuracy RTK receivers used in agriculture, used in construction, used in geography management. So you go and take those kind of numbers and you go and times it. Basically, it comes out to $1,600 per unit that it will cost in order to go through and retrofit it with this filter. Go and take it times that $1 million 1 million high-accuracy RTK GPSs that are out there in the marketplace.
The numbers I actually used were that the universe of devices could be about 750,000 in the country. It's not entirely known exactly. It could be as high as 1 million. But in terms of the ones that actually have to be replaced or retrofitted, it's not going to be that entire universe. First of all, because a significant number of precision devices have already tested out in terms of being resilient. So that's 10 out of 38, or almost 25%. Second, many of these receivers are going to be used in areas which are going to be far away from anywhere our network is going to be. And third, this is not a flash cut. We are going to be deploying our network over a period of 5 years. There will be a certain amount of exchange of devices that would take place in the ordinary course of business anyway. So that's how you get down to the 100,000 to maybe 200,000 number that you have to focus on and actually change out, just to correct the record.
I don't want to dominate the questions because we got a lot of members here with questions, and I'll save the rest of mine for the end of the hearing. But I do have one quick one for you, Mr. Carlisle, because the test results have revealed some significant interference in that upper 10 megahertz band, and so you have proposed launching in the lower 10 for your service. My question to you is, will you guys never use that upper 10?
Well, we'll certainly use it for. We'll certainly continue to use it for satellite services. We've used it there for 15 years without any issue at all with GPS. And those satellite services provide services to public safety, oil and gas, all sorts of folks in the United States uses it. And our satellite services were used after Hurricane Katrina. After the tornadoes in Joplin, first responders had our units there. So we will continue to use the spectrum. We would like a continued dialogue as to whether or not we could ever commercially deploy that spectrum, because then you do start to get into the issues that Mr. Taylor and Mr. Boykin have raised about aviation functions and the susceptibility of a larger number of GPS receivers simply because more of them look into that spectrum. So you'd need a longer conversation about that, but we're open to having that discussion and open to talking about alternatives.
Yeah, but right now, I mean, basically you're not using that upper band you're just basically doing that that's just the company has decided not to do it. There's no requirement for that. You can use it at any time. Let me be clear. The only issue that comes up down the road is if we deploy out in our network using the 10 megahertz all the way down on the other end of the band. We can do our full deployment to 260 million people with that amount of spectrum. The issue is the number of devices, the amount of usage that ultimately goes on the network. That won't be a problem we have for at least 5 to 6 years. So, and in the meantime, you can skin that cat a lot of different ways. You can modify the way you're using your current spectrum. You can use the new spectrum in ways that are very different, much lower powers that would not raise an issue on interference. You could also look at swapping for alternative spectrum or something like that. There are a whole bunch of things that should be looked at before while we move forward on the lower 10. And also, keep in mind, our customers are retailers. They'll have options in the marketplace too. By that time, other spectrum may very well have been brought online, and if they need more spectrum for their customers, they can go out and buy it from somebody else. So I think there are a lot of different ways to skin that cat down the road, and we're willing to talk with the government agencies and the GPS manufacturers about how we do that. I am worried about the future and this, betting on the come that something's going to happen in the time frame between now and then. That worries me a great deal, that it isn't going to happen. I'm going to yield, and Ranking Member Velazquez.
Thank you. Mr. Carlisle, if filtering technology is the solution to interference, are you aware of how much it will cost small firms? Because after all, this is a small business committee, and we are here because we understand that it could have a negative impact on small businesses. And I would like to know if it is important for all of us to recognize that it is not just the cost of retrofitting, but also if you took into account indirect costs, such as time and lost resources or use of equipment, if those were included in your calculation.
Okay. Well, that's a very good question, and thank you for asking it, because I think it highlights an important point there, is in that filtering is not the only solution. Filtering is the solution for high precision receivers. Okay, for the vast number of small businesses who day to day only use consumer level devices that aren't precision, moving down to the spectrum and lowering our power is going to address the issue for them. Now, for those small businesses who do use precision equipment, Our very strongly held belief is it shouldn't cost them a cent. It shouldn't cost them a cent. We will be deploying our network in a way that they will have advance notice of where we'll be and when we'll be there. There will be time for them to work with their manufacturers to get alternatives, and the manufacturers really should be stepping forward on this. I don't think there's any question about that. Mr. Taylor's, in his testimony, has made statements that this was all of a sudden came up and wasn't anticipated. That our power levels were all of a sudden jumped up. We are operating at transmission levels, power levels that were approved in 2005. Okay. There have been years to address this issue.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, the DOD's 2008 GPS standard encouraged filters for GPS devices. Can you please explain how exactly these filters minimize interference and whether you currently use these filters in your GPS devices?
First of all, we do not make much in the way of military GPS. We do a small amount of military GPS, so I cannot specifically address that question. From a more general aviation receiver point of view, we would be happy to look at filtering as a possible means of mitigating the risk associated with the spectrum challenges we're talking about. Mm-hmm. GPS is different from telecommunications. The way GPS works, the signal, I will not get technical, I promise, but the signal is a broadband spread-out signal. We need, in order to reliably discriminate the information, we need to be able to see a broadband signal. So filtering limits that, and filtering will impact the performance of our receivers. I can't tell you today to what extent.
Mr. Carlyle, I understand the updated plan includes a design to eventually expand operations to the entire spectrum band, yet no details have been provided. Does the company have a timetable for this expansion, and how will this affect GPS?
We won't need additional capacity, as I said earlier, for at least 5 to 6 years. And so I think that's the outside timetable. And as I said, there are many alternatives that we would want to consider to see what was commercially reasonable and safe.
Your company believes that its plan can increase coverage to at least 260 million people by the end of 2015. In light of our current economic conditions, what role do you see your company's expanded wireless broadband network playing in job creation?
I think it'll play a significant role in it. To build that network, you have to plow $9 billion into the American economy. We've already spent $1 billion in American technology to put our satellites up. That was with Boeing in Washington State and Harrison, Florida. In order to achieve a network build like this, you have to spend a tremendous amount of money all across the country. Wherever you put a tower up, that's folks from your vendors, that's contractors, that's small business people providing that service, and then it's contractors and small business people providing the maintenance going forward. So we have estimated very conservatively that the impact of our investment on the American economy is 15,000 jobs supported a year for each of the 5 years of the build-out. Following that, each one of our business partners, because they don't have to spend money on owning and maintaining their own network, can plow that money into their own retail operations and hire jobs there.
Okay. My question to the other three witnesses. The FCC believes that LightSquared proposed network is going to benefit and have a positive impact on broadband access for rural small businesses. But we also know that existing GPS technology will be harmed. So my question to the three witnesses is, how do you recommend that we proceed going forward? Should an innovative idea be outright rejected without any real attempts to find a technical solution? Mr. Boykin.
Thank you, ma'am. And obviously, we don't want to withhold any technology. Technology has led our economy. I'll go back to, I'm starting to sound like a broken record here. We need to do some testing. Things aren't always as they appear to be in the RF spectrum. And I'll point back to the fact that the original test had one base station. I pointed out earlier I used to work for Motorola. Motorola was not only the company that designed land mobile radio in the beginning. Motorola is the company that invented cellular technology with the 800 megahertz system Mr. Carlisle referred to. Those experiences at Motorola taught me that when you get 2 or more radios in close proximity, things get different. And you'll note that some of these tests were done with one radio in an anechoic chamber, a noise-free chamber. We need to put a couple of base stations out there, a couple of handsets, and I'll offer up my airplane. If somebody wants to chip in for the gas, I'd be happy to fly out to New Mexico. It's a beautiful state, and fly over and make sure that this thing actually works.
Mr. Green.
Thank you. I concur with the rest of the group that the fact that we need to do some additional testing, and being a Cubs fan and knowing that their spring training happens out in springtime out in Arizona, I'd be happy to go out there and help out in any possible way that I can. However, definitely some more testing needs to be made. We feel like broadband internet will bring an exceptional increase to our business perspective as well. But if we don't have the GPS to collect the data, there will be no data to transfer into in order to do more processing.
Again, we all agree that we need more broadband services in the country, no doubt. But from the aviation community's point of view, it's taken decades of a complicated interaction between receivers, GPS constellation, ground infrastructure, to come with something that's robust enough to be safety of life, for people to fly safely. And one or two flight tests would be fun, but it will not answer the question. And I cannot tell you there is a fast answer for this. I think it is going to take time and analysis and interaction. I cannot see any other answer, I'm afraid.
Mr. Carlisle, what is wrong with testing?
There's nothing wrong with testing, and in fact, we're fully supportive of the further testing that NTIA asked for. But I'm not sure the background materials Mr. Taylor has read, but frankly, there's been a more comprehensive testing of this issue than any other interference issue ever presented to the FCC. There were 130 devices tested in 8 independent labs over a series of months by an industry group that had 37 of the nation's top GPS engineers on it. That was just the industry testing. There were dozens of devices tested in New Mexico at Holloman Air Force Base by the U.S. Air Force. Furthermore, there were devices tested by the FAA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Moreover, RTCA, their GPS group, ran an analysis of the minimum performance standards against our signal, and that analysis is continuing to be done by FAA. So we have no issue with there being further testing to make sure we're absolutely safe on safety of life. But let's not ignore the fact there's been an awful lot of testing already and analysis.
Mr. Schilling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, in a couple of things, I guess I'll go to Mr. Carlisle. If the retrofit replacement of the GPS receivers in the market, if you have to do a retrofit, will you guys be paying for that, or will that be the person that's having the retrofit done, say a farmer, for example?
That's a very important question, because for 9 months, what the GPS manufacturers have done is they've said there's only 2 parties in this debate. There's the LightSquared network, and there are the users of GPS who are going to be affected by it. They've conveniently left themselves out of the equation. Again, I don't think the users should have to pay a cent. We have already paid, and the total value of our commitments is over $160 million at this point to solve the problem for the vast majority of consumer devices. For these precision devices, where there really is no solution that we can put on our transmissions except to abandon the band entirely, we think, given we're talking about 100 to 200,000 devices, maybe a few more than that, but that's the order of magnitude we're talking about, and that our power levels have been set for 6 years, that's the right outcome there.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And I want to go to Rick Green. I come from a large agricultural area. One of the things, have you guys done any looks at maybe like if things do need to be switched around, how long a tractor will have to be down? You know, how that'll affect like a single tractor versus a large family farm?
I haven't put any numbers per se, but with one of the things with agriculture is it is very time sensitive. And it's one of those things where if we can't get to everybody by springtime, then a producer could go and have the option. And, well, here, I've got. A producer could go and see a projected downtime of, well, let me just give you an example. So in the state of Missouri, we have 1 million acres underneath high accuracy RTK coverage. Okay. If you go and look at 180 bushels per acre times $7 corn, say for instance those acres don't go through and get planted, that will be $1.26 billion that the producers will have lost that year just for our 1 million acres that we have in the state of Missouri.
Okay, that's a lot of corn. Okay, very good. That's all the questions I have. I yield back my time, Chairman.
Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. My question, Mr. Carlisle, and I guess I'll take it into a little bit different direction. You're talking about developing this out in rural communities, correct? I'm very concerned because when you start to look at a lot of military type of activity are out around a lot of rural communities like NTC, National Training Center, 29 Palms, China Lake, impact areas, and this type of thing. My question is, what type of testing and what is your implementation plan? What have you done to work with the Department of Defense as far as aircraft, helicopters, fixed wing, laser designating devices, and as well as smart munitions? Because I think it would be a bad day for small businesses and communities if that spectrum were to somehow interfere with a training exercise, and all of a sudden a smart munition ends up somewhere where it's not supposed to be.
Thank you for your question. We've actually been working with DoD since 2008 to coordinate the use of our spectrum, and with the OASD NII group within the Pentagon. And in terms of the more recent identified issue with GPS receivers, which was really only brought up in September of 2010, we have had extensive exchanges with U.S. Space Command about the use of GPS within the U.S. military, also with Northern Command. General Shelton's testimony before the House Armed Services Committee a few weeks ago quite accurately outlined the fact that, well, you got to train the way you're going to fight, and so we have to be using the same equipment here as we're using over there. The fact is that we know where the training facilities are. We know where the proving grounds are. Today, we operate under a very significant requirement to limit our power near airfields and near navigable waterways. It limits our power significantly in order to avoid any interference with aircraft or maritime receivers in our band. You can extend those operating limits to base stations we might put near military bases in order to avoid that interference, because you know where the activity is going on. That's one thing you can do. There are other options.
Well, then my question is, have we actually put some of these towers out there and run some tests on this with across the spectrum with different types of aircraft and munitions to make sure that we are certified?
The U.S. Air Force ran classified testing of military receivers in New Mexico in April of this last year. Those results are classified. Our cleared consultants have not seen them, but we would assume they've run that testing. Now, they ran it under our old business plan, which was to start closest to GPS, and that's part of the reason there was a need for further testing now, is to make sure that the lower 10 option works for those.
And for the rest of the panel, I guess the question is, when was the first time that you all really heard about this impact or potential interference on the GPS system? Was this, kind of like surprises that we should be just restrained to birthdays?
Well, I'm not sure about the about birthdays, Congressman West, but I can tell you that like a lot of issues that come up in public policy, we had a land development issue next to our airport that we learned about by reading about it in the Washington Business Journal. We learned about this by reading about it in the newspaper. I understand that the most recent application to the FCC over the Thanksgiving weekend last year literally was over the Thanksgiving weekend, and the public notice came out with a 10-day turn over the Thanksgiving holiday, which, having done a lot of business with the Federal Government, I find pretty speedy. But our first indication of this was strictly out in the public arena.
Same thing here. We basically first heard about it in the public arena probably around the March or April timeframe. And then from there, it was quite simply kind of watching the news to see as this thing progresses.
The same answer, I'm afraid. It's been less than a year, and been trying to keep up with it as reports appear in the press. We have more recently been contacted by the FAA and by the military to provide receivers for testing. So we're beginning to become involved that way, but quite recently.
May I say when we first learned of it? I'll be very quick. We first learned of it in September of 2010 when the GPS manufacturers brought it to the attention of the FCC. We have actually been working GPS interference issues with the GPS community since 2002 when we reached an agreement with them to limit our emissions into their band. So we have a cliff on our spectrum. There are filters in our transmitters that stop our signal from leaking into GPS. The issue that was, and there was no problem with that agreement for 8 years. There's still no problem with that agreement. All the equipment tested out the way it should. The issue that was raised in September 2010, much to our surprise as well as everybody else's here, was that the GPS receivers look well into our band. So it doesn't really matter if we're limiting our signal. If we're operating within our band, within our authorized frequencies, they're looking at it and can be overloaded. So that's when we learned of it, and we've been dealing with it since then, too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Herrera-Butler. Mr. Hanna.
Well, it costs to retrofit, or not retrofit, but for new devices not thought of or built yet to accommodate your bandwidth?
It depends on the device. If you're talking about cellular phones where you've got millions of these devices and you can build at a very high level of volume, you're talking about filters that cost less than a nickel that exist today that can go into this. I think there was some ambiguity, or we just nobody really knew how expensive it would be to develop a filter for precision devices, which are really the hardest ones to deal with. Well, we now know that you can deal with precision receivers that are on the market today and also sold to government agencies and surveyors and all sorts of people who use them for $6. So going forward, this is a very small incremental cost to deal with.
And you estimate that you'll be able to provide Internet service to another 50 billion people in rural communities?
Is that on top of the 260 million we're required to?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we have already struck deals with several rural companies that we have the potential to go outside of our footprint. That's Cellular South, SI Wireless in Southern Illinois, and just today we announced a deal with a company that plans to deploy in towns down to 10,000 people or less that will reach out to areas that have been historically underserved. We may not have a regulatory requirement to serve above those 260 million people, but it's good business to do it, and we should be doing it.
And have you done studies on the potential growth from that, economic growth?
I know there are studies out there that indicate broadband infrastructure investment is one of the major determinants of economic growth. I grew up in a rural neighborhood that where we had electromechanical switches until the 1980s in California, and I'll tell you the one thing that keeps people in rural communities is if they feel they've got economic opportunity there. They're not going to have that economic opportunity if you don't have the highway going out there. Same thing is they're not going to have that economic opportunity if you don't have the broadband infrastructure there today. It's just not going to happen. And leave aside issues like public safety, provision of medical services, and education.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carlisle, I would like to go back to one of your comments. You talked about the filters stopping leaking, as you described it. Does that have, is that 100% with the filters? There's not going to be a problem?
Yeah, that was, yes, sir. That was confirmed in both the industry test and the government testing. Both confirmed that our filters are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They actually filter our signal down to a level that's 1,000 times stricter than what the FCC requires for us. And that was a level, by the way, that the GPS industry picked in 2002 and asked us to agree to. So that's what we agreed to.
Okay, great. Yeah. I come from rural Colorado and obviously support a lot of broadband being moved out into rural America, but we have a lot of problems right now, particularly for our small businesses that are struggling in terms of a lot of the costs. None more so probably than a lot of our farmers and other GPS users who are already struggling right now in our economy. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates that about 50 million people live in these rural areas. How many of these 50 million citizens that are in rural America right now would receive new broadband service? And additionally, can you tell us how many would be covered by LightSquared if you move forward with your operations?
Well, in terms of wireless service, they'll get it the day we turn on and get our new next-generation units out there. Remember, we've got a satellite that covers 100% of the United States and out to 200 nautical miles offshore. And it reaches these devices. That's why we spent $1 billion on it. We spent $250 million of that billion inventing technology that had never been built before. So when the day we're out there,
is that satellite? Is that just a receiver that then transmits? Is the technology on the ground?
Yeah, it's a pipe. So you can put basically any kind of signal you need over it. So, and that will operate at speeds that are approximate to what you get on 3G today. So you can do phone calls, emails, texts on it today. Now, when we roll out, the rollout of our 4G network, that's going to depend on the business deals we do and the opportunity out there. But I will say this, we've had a significant amount of interest from rural wireless companies who don't see an alternative to being able to build out. On this issue, there was a 700 megahertz for rural development that was put out there, and unfortunately, those carriers can't get enough of a volume to be able to attract the chip companies and the handset manufacturers to put those frequencies on their devices. So it's been very difficult for them to actually have an independent way of moving forward, and that's why entities like the Rural Cellular Association support LightSquared.
Right. And I think that's an important point because it does get down to some economics. In your statement, you claimed that the revised implementation plan will solve interference for 99.5% of GPS receivers. And making the assumption, this is obviously a big assumption, that your figures are completely accurate. I understand that 0.5% of the receivers you admit are affected by high-precision receivers used in agriculture, construction, and surveying. You stated in your testimony that this 0.5% figure is actually 750,000 to, I believe, 1 million units. That's a lot of Americans that are going to potentially be negatively impacted by this implementation. How are we going to deal with that?
To be clear about the number, I think 99.5% is probably a liberal estimate of it. Actually, if you take the worst-case scenario of only 400 million devices in the universe, which seems to be the minimum we've ever seen as an estimate, and 1 million precision devices being out there, which is the largest number we've ever seen estimated, it's 0.25%. So really the number should be 99.75%. But in terms of how we fix that, there are 3 factors which indicate that the full universe is not going to need to be replaced. First, a significant number of precision devices use different types of technology. Some use satellite technology to achieve high levels of precision. Some, like RTK, use terrestrial technology. So when you test these out, you see different results. And in 10 out of 38, we're fine. Now, the majority won't be. And by the way, fine, I mean They didn't suffer harmful interference under the strictest definition of harmful interference used by the GPS manufacturers. So not all of them are going to be affected. Not all of them are going to be used in close proximity to where we'll be operating. Even in rural communities where we're deploying, we may only have the ground network in the denser areas rather than in the far fields out far away. And then third, it's not a flash cut. We'll be deploying over 5 years, and we will have an unprecedented level of transparency as to where we're going to be and when we're going to be there, so people will know well in advance. And a certain number of these devices are going to change out in the ordinary course of business anyway. So in terms of the cost, I think you start getting that portion. If you assume it's 750,000 or $1 million, is it 300,000 devices? Is it 200,000? Is it 100,000? We've seen that estimate from some GPS manufacturers. I don't know, but it's not going to be the full universe, and we believe that cost is appropriately borne by the manufacturers.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Vavamady has no questions, which let the record show that's a first time. And so, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing. It's something that needed to be and still needs to be aired out, and I find myself in one of those conflicting pieces of real estate that is very much impacted by the GPS guidance of our farm equipment, and also can use a little more broadband. But I wanted to direct my first question to Mr. Green, and that is the impact on precision farm equipment GPS guidance. And as that was developed, I don't know how many years ago we're talking about, perhaps 10 years or so ago, as it was putting in place, do you have knowledge of any efforts that were made to look at the spectrum then? And do you have the basis by which the decisions were made to build out the ag guidance technology on that spectrum?
Yes, I'd be happy to address that issue. The agricultural industry looked at that kind of spectrum back in the, I believe it was around the late 90s, early 2000s area. And one of the things that I've gotten from several manufacturers of GPS is that they were actually asked to have their spectrum in that area be movable, if you will. So if the company called SkyTerra at the time would like to go and change the OmniStar megahertz signal that it was operating it on, the company could go and move it from one side of the spectrum to the other side of the spectrum.
Okay, and your perspective on this is that the spectrum that's been purchased by LightSquared, you disagree, I think, to where the overlap might be. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, that's correct.
And if a decision were made then on where that bright line might be rather than where that gray line might be, how would you respond to this? And that would be that if a company or an entity purchases spectrum, that they have a complete and full legal right to that spectrum, aside from the definition of where that bright line versus gray line might be. Would you agree with that? Mr. Green?
Yes.
Thank you. And then, so if there's to be mitigation of this problem that I sure hope does get resolved, and the testimony that's been here in the dialogue about the filter, that at least presumably and can resolve this, what's your position on which side of this spectrum should pay for that technology? Which side of this argument should pay for that technology?
You know, there is an old interference phrase that goes across the regular wireless network, first come, first serve. And basically when you go and put a new frequency up on a tower, if your frequency interferes with somebody else, then you have to go ahead and remove your equipment or find an alternative way in order to resolve the issue.
But provided you own that spectrum, as you've said earlier.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
And so aside from that, I mean, I guess I'll say even with that argument, let's just say that some entity has the authority to make this decision clearly, and they draw a bright line. And that bright line is someplace along the line where some of this GPS equipment that I want to keep operating, I want to solve this problem in the worst way. If that finds itself on a spectrum that is as clearly and legally determined to be LightSquared's, then you would say from a legal perspective, it's up to then the ag industry to take care of the cost of the filtration.
Well, I would say there's no clear-cut line in this. Like the other couple gentlemen were saying, is that frequencies have a tendency to go and bleed together. And testing out that interference and checking to see what is available is what the real key is. Now,
so you would say you would apply the first come, first serve to that area.
That's correct.
And I'm running out of time, so I didn't want to spend it all focused on you, Mr. Green, but I appreciate that. And I wanted to turn then to Mr. Carlisle, who's listened to all of this dialogue, and ask the opposite side, the 180-degree opposite of these questions. If the shoe's on the other foot, if it's determined in a clear way that the GPS people are there with a spectrum that they have a claim to, whether it's a gray area or a bleed over or a first come, first serve, who then would you say should pay for the filtration? And you, I think you've testified, I'm going to guess this, that this problem can technologically be solved. Doesn't it sort then down to who writes the check to solve it?
That's exactly right. And what I would say is if this were a case of our transmitter bleeding across into GPS spectrum, into the spectrum that they are using, that is federal government spectrum, by the way, that is used by the GPS manufacturers at no cost, if we are bleeding over there, then that would be our responsibility to solve. And we spent $9 million developing the filters to solve that. There's a chart at the back of my testimony that shows this. If the question, though, are their receivers looking into our band, there is no principle of first come, first serve recognized in the law, certainly not in FCC regulations. FCC allows you to build any kind of receiver you want, but you have to take the risk if you are looking outside your band, and if you have the effect of blocking authorized services, you have no claim to protection. And by the way, this is recognized in the user manuals of many GPS devices. I've got an excerpt here from a Garmin G900X integrated cockpit GPS navigation device manual, which says this device complies with Part 15 of the FCC rules, the rule I just mentioned. Operation is subject to the following two conditions. The device may not cause harmful interference, and this device must accept any interference received, including interference that may cause undesired operation.
I appreciate that acknowledgment. I just conclude with this question. Is either side of this argument looking for the taxpayers to pay the difference?
Absolutely not.
No.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that, and I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And I yield back.
Mr. Carlisle, as far as the testing goes, you guys have tested your upper bandwidth, but you're still in the process of testing the lower bandwidth, correct? Those results aren't in yet?
To be clear, the technical working group testing, which was the industry testing, for all classes of devices, the lower 10 was tested. So we have a full set of data for all 130 devices. The further testing that needed to be done was for classified receivers that were not tested on the lower 10 in the independent government testing, and some additional validation testing as NTIA set out in its letter a couple of weeks ago.
My next question is, Mr. Taylor and Mr. Carlisle, you can comment too, and you talk a lot about, over the course of the next 5 or 6 years, there's going to be normal change out of devices, but in the aviation community, because they are so expensive, because of certification issues out there, there's still a lot of older devices out there that are working very well, and we hope work well into the future. But Mr. Taylor, can you comment on those? And you know the ones I'm talking about, the ones that came out in the 90s, in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes, sir. Normal service life for commercial aviation equipment, minimum is 15 years. We're required to support equipment for 15 years. Often it lasts much longer than that. As you said, it's incredibly expensive to make a change to an aircraft, to change a critical system like the GPS. And the larger the aircraft, the more complex the change. So those systems that predate this entire discussion are in the field in thousands. And I know thousands is not a big number compared to the numbers we're hearing in terms of equipment's fielded here, but it's 1,000 that you care about. It's airplanes that you fly on every day. Many of them have equipment that was developed long before this debate started, and to which no one knows the answer. I don't know the answer. I built it. I don't know the answer to its susceptibility. and that equipment will, in the normal course of business, be in service for at least another 5 years. Some of the older equipment, some of it for much longer than that. It lasts for a long time and it stays in service. On the spectrum, I just want to clarify something on the spectrum. The RTCA, as you said, the RTCA preliminary report, which was a quick report, said that if LightSquared, stays at the lower 5 megahertz of the lower spectrum, lower half of the lower spectrum, at very reduced power, you just impinge or don't impinge on the standards to which new equipment is developed, brand new equipment. If you go to the next 10 megahertz, next 5 megahertz, the lower band, its acquisition is affected, tracking might be affected. You go to the upper band, then acquisition and tracking is affected. RTCA said that at the full spectrum, there will be no GPS aviation service over the entire eastern United States and close to any major city where this system was operating. Today I heard for the first time again, the lower 10 megahertz is now the one that's contemplated. If the lower 10 megahertz is used at even the reduced powers that we're discussing, RTCA says, I say, you will have problems with aviation GPS receivers, even the newest ones that are in service today. And who knows what the story is with the older ones.
I'd like to correct the record on a couple of things. First of all, on what RTCA found. What it found was that the lower 5 was clear and that the next 5 megahertz for tracking was likely fine, but there could be issues with acquisition and further analysis was necessary, and FAA is undertaking that further analysis. The RTCA report did say that if we were using our upper 10 megahertz, then that could impact aviation. But unfortunately, this issue continues to be conflated into our new proposals to move down to the lower 10 at the power levels we were authorized to do in 2005. The other point that I would mention is on the aviation receivers and whether the older ones are better than the newer ones. One thing we found through the testing process is months and months and months ago when we were at the very beginning of this, I think we, like other people, just assumed, well, this has got to be old GPS receivers that just, it's old technology. Certainly the newer technology is better. Well, what we found out was that wasn't actually the case. Older technology actually is in some cases less susceptible to this kind of interference because it's not as wide open. The GPS industry has moved further and further into more and more precise equipment that requires you to pick up more GPS energy, requires them to look further and further into our band. And I'm happy to get further follow-up information on this to make sure I'm recalling this correctly. But my understanding is the older RTCA standards, which predated the currently applicable ones, are actually less open and have less wide open receivers than the ones that are currently authorized under the current standard. And that's the one that's being analyzed today. But I'll provide follow-up information on that to make sure that's correct.
Mr. Boykin, did you have a comment?
Far be it from me to spoil a really good party, but in fact I'm following along with the RTCA paper, and Mr. Carlisle is exactly accurate in his comments about that. But what it points out there is that there is a small margin for error. That same paper points out that traditionally, GPS being an aviation safety service, the analysis includes a 6 decibel safety margin as standard practice. I'm starting to see numbers here that are getting very small and a very small safety margin, so my comment to that would be back to the same comment we started with. There's a significant amount of testing that needs to be done, and as my colleague from the GPS manufacturer said, that isn't going to be taken lightly and isn't going to be done tomorrow.
Mr. Green, I'll give you the last word.
Well, we all know how much wireless internet to rural areas, as well as GPS, is to the rest of the country, and how much of an economic impact. And like to go and follow everybody else and say that, you know what, more testing does need to be done, and I hope that we don't jump into a situation that gets everybody in trouble in the end.
I want to thank you all for participating today. The committee is going to very closely follow the action of the FCC and the LightSquared proposal, and I plan to send a letter to the FCC reinforcing the need for comprehensive tests of all types of devices to ensure that there isn't going to be any interference for small business GPS users. With that, I'd ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to submit statements supporting materials for the record. Seeing no objection, it is so ordered, and with that, the hearing is adjourned.